Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today. I'm Susie Roos, and together with Michelle Pettigrew, we run the Salon series for Agenda for Democracy. Welcome to the kickoff of our 2025 Salon series, Restoring the Guardrails, the Fight for Democracy. From the overwhelming turnout, Michelle and I know that so many of you are ready to fight to save our country and to preserve democracy. But before we get started, I wanted to thank our many co-hosts, and a special shout out to Mark Bergman, who many of you came from Mark Bergman advertising this event. As we all know, we are getting bombarded every day with the reality of Trump 2.0. How did we get here, and what can we do about it? That's why we restarted our Salon series, to explore how we can respond to the situation that we find ourselves in through legal, civic, legislative, and technological power. How can we use these to push back on authoritarianism and build a stronger, resilient democracy?
So we're kicking things off tonight with someone who's been helping us make sense of these crossroads for decades. Larry Diamond, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford and a globally respected expert on democratic backsliding and renewal. Tonight's session sets the tone for the entire series. We'll explore how civic institutions, Congress, the courts, and yes, everyday citizens like everyone on this call can stand up to authoritarian drift and help rebuild what's been broken. But before we dive in, a few quick logistics notes. We want to thank everyone who submitted questions for Larry. We've organized these and tried to weave these into our moderated discussion questions. So hopefully you'll recognize some of your questions as we get into the meat of the event tonight. We want tonight to feel less like a lecture and more like a live strategy session. So please jump into the chat, share your thoughts, reactions, and ideas. We'll add your voices into the conversation throughout the hour as best we can. Please start your questions with the word question in the front so that we can easily find them in the chat when we go looking. We'll go for about 60 minutes, and audience questions will start around 4:30 or 4:40. Many of you submitted questions about where to find hope or signs of democratic renewal, and we're holding those for our closing questions, so stay tuned, we will get to that. We know this is a serious topic, but we also believe that civic engagement should feel human, connected, and even energizing. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Larry, so much once again for kicking off our Salon series.
Sure.
I think this is the third time in a row that you've come on for us at the beginning of a cycle, and you always have such good advice and wisdom. And I think we followed pretty much what you have advised us to do for the last couple cycles. So we're looking forward to what you have to share with us for today. So our first question is going to be about diagnosing the crisis. How do you characterize the current threat to American democracy? Are we already in a competitive authoritarian state or still sliding toward one akin to early day Hungary or Turkey? And how urgent is the crisis at this point?
I don't think that we have crossed over into an authoritarian regime. The definition of a democracy is that people can choose and replace their leaders in free and fair elections. And I've got to change this view, so I'm not looking at myself. And I would much rather look at all of you. And we, there's no indication yet that we can't choose and replace our leaders and engage in the level of organization and speaking and exercise of First Amendment rights that would make meaningful the competition between parties, programs, and views. However, and the however is we're on a pathway toward an authoritarian regime. We have a president who has an authoritarian mindset and has, I think, been quite evident about having that and as his personality and his goal, despite the war that he has launched on universities, on the First Amendment, on the rule of law, on constitutional boundaries. He has a 45% approval rating. That is not a majority, but it's not a trivial minority either. And they have a strategy for aggrandizing and personalizing power, certainly abusing power, both corruptly and punitively. And their goal is kind of, I think, a Hungarian style autocracy, which has the outer shell of democracy, but in which they have barricaded themselves in power, made it largely impossible for opponents to come to power, and in which they weaponize the instruments of national government power, including in this case the FBI. We haven't seen this shoe drop yet, but I think the IRS, and the power to make federal government appointments, grants, the NSF, the NIH, to be employed in the federal civil service, to weaponize all of that toward the goal of getting a political system in which the president and his party are hegemonic and cannot be displaced, and which the president essentially has no checks on his authority or his discretion or his ambition. This is blatantly unconstitutional and undemocratic, but they are, moving forward relentlessly on this ambition and this agenda with so far a mixed record of rulings on the part of the Supreme Court.
So this session is kind of about the tools that we have at our disposal and how we can use those, pull those levers. So the next question is about 2025, 2026, and the 2028 races. You've emphasized that the most powerful tool we have is the electoral one. Many of us here organize candidate events and directly fund races. So from your perspective, what are the most critical elections in 2025 and what's truly at stake? You've pointed to Pennsylvania as pivotal for the 2025 election and also the 2028 presidential election. Can you explain why? And looking ahead to 2026 and beyond, where should we be focusing our support?
Well, I've made that point to you and to Susie. I don't think I've made it to anybody else. And so
no one else knows, so this is great.
the other 173 people on this line right now must be wondering, what the heck are you talking about? Pennsylvania has its state elections in 2026, not 2025. Now, the only two states that have statewide elections in 2025 are Virginia and New Jersey. Those are very important states. I think the odds are pretty strong that New Jersey will remain a state governed by the Democrats and a Democratic governor, though if they choose a radical left-wing candidate for governor, I think all bets are off. I'm not going to, express a preference in the race. I will say there is a really impressive Democratic member of Congress, a woman combat veteran, former Army helicopter pilot, Mikey Sherrill, who's running for governor of North Carolina, and I think is an interesting and serious candidate. In Virginia, which is now ruled by a Republican governor, the recent former Democratic representative from the Richmond area to the U.S. Congress, Abigail Spanberger, decided not to run for re-election because she decided she was going to run for governor of Virginia. I thought, by the way, that was a very principled and forthright decision. She could have said, oh, I don't want to take any risks. I'll run for Congress and then I'll run for governor. If then I lose, I'll still be a member of Congress. Tells you something about her integrity and her courage. She's a former undercover CIA agent that she decided to just roll the dice. I think she will be the next governor of Virginia. I think she is a very impressive public servant. And if you're asking, because we'll come to this later, who might be, the presidential candidates in 2028, I think that she will serve out her term as governor of Virginia if she's elected, but she could be a very impressive vice presidential candidate. So that takes care of the two states, Michelle, that elect their governors and state legislatures and other officers in the odd year of the year after a presidential election. So why Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania is one of those many states in the United States that put their state Supreme Court justices up for election. It's a terrible system. I hate it. I don't think any judge at any level should ever face the voters. I think they should be appointed by professional panels, and at the higher level, through a political process of appointment, vetting, and confirmation by a state legislature, and only removed for cause. But it is what it is. And so right now, if you can put it this crudely, and unfortunately you can, Democrats have a 5-2 majority on the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. And 3 Democratic judges are up for a confirmation vote to another 10-year term on the state Supreme Court in an election, a scheduled election this November. If those 3 Democratic judges were to lose, they would lose their seats. The Democratic governor would appoint replacements, but they would only be there for 2 years. And in 2027, there would be an election to elect 3 new justices of the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, with momentum then behind the Republican Party and the conservatives. If Republicans were to capture the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, you'd not only have a woman's right to choose and many other civil liberties potentially at risk in Pennsylvania, but they would risk deciding the way the North Carolina Supreme Court has decided, in ways to try and tip the electoral balance of power to make it more difficult for Democrats to win anything. And including who can vote in elections. It's a scenario that you could play out in detail, but it doesn't need to be played out here. One only needs to say that if the Republicans capture the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, they are very likely to politicize the Supreme Court in a way to try and create an unfree and unfair electoral playing field in the state of Pennsylvania in 2028. And if the Democrats do not win Pennsylvania, in my personal view, as a political scientist, they have almost no pathway to take back the presidency. So if you ask me, what's the most important election in the United States in 2025? It is this obscure election that nobody has heard of, nobody knows about, that will determine whether the 3 Democratic justices of the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania are reconfirmed and returned to the bench for another 10-year term. And the good news here is that such an election, you can imagine, is not an exactly a high turnout election in the state of Pennsylvania. It's virtually the only thing or the main thing on the ballot. And that means a focused effort by Democrats to raise money, to organize, to mount a social media campaign, to reach voters in where they are geographically, socially, psychologically, and on social media could have a very big impact. And so in my mind, if people are asking, oh, gee, what can I do? How can I have an impact? I'd say focus on Pennsylvania, folks.
Excellent. What about flipping the House in 2026? I know you have that as a priority as well. You could talk to us a little bit about that.
Let me explain why I think it's like ridiculously obvious why it's so important to flip the House. But it probably could benefit from a slight amount of reinforcement. First of all, Democrats are very close to flipping the House. They're just a few seats away. We lost another Democratic member of Congress, Gerald Connolly, just recently. There'll be a special election to fill his seat, and then Democrats will be up to what something like 215 members. So they win another 3 seats and they have control of the House. Now you don't want a one seat margin, but in the average election, going back over time, 10 to 12 House seats change. So all they need is a normal election to have a decent majority, 8, 9 seat majority in the House. And I think Trump is, proving so erratic and so damaging to the economy, to people's livelihoods, to our national security, to the national interest, that, it's plausible Democrats could pick up 15, 18, 20 seats. What would it mean for Democrats to control the House of Representatives? First of all, Trump couldn't pass anything without a bipartisan consensus, including spending and taxing, right? Because spending bills originate in the House of Representatives. So a lot of his efforts to ravage federal spending and to distort the provision of social services to people or cut the addressing of basic needs could be more effectively responded to. But the other thing is, without a majority in either the House or Senate, the Democrats have no ability to investigate anything, right? The Republican leadership controls the agenda for all the investigative committees. We have everyone on this call knows this. I doubt that there's a single person on this call that would dissent from this judgment. We have in the White House now, by far, the most corrupt presidential administration in the history of the United States. And if you didn't see Peter Baker's article, I think on Sunday, detailing this in the New York Times, I highly recommend it. It's just one shocking, outrageous conflict of interest and receipt of corrupt payment through, the cryptocurrency accounts that his family have, and through a variety of other means of payment from corporations, from foreign nations. It's just government for sale, and for sale quite literally to the president and his family. And people are saying, well, why isn't this being investigated? Why isn't there an outcry? Who's going to investigate it? He's fired all the inspectors general. He is purging the Justice Department. He has an attorney general who's a slavish loyalist, and the Democrats don't have any investigative power in the Congress. So right now, the only people capable of investigating it is the media and maybe a few civil society organizations. So capturing the House of Representatives in 2026, I think, is absolutely essential to beginning to investigate the corruption and abuse of power of this administration, and also restoring a certain degree of faith and hope among Democrats that they can win national elections. And if they don't form another circular firing squad, they're well positioned to do so in 2028.
Right. Yeah, we've been saying that the path to winning the House goes through California for the last 3 cycles, I think. So maybe this will be the one that we actually get there. But on the topic of California, many of us on this call are based here in California, and there's often the sense that being in a solid blue state limits what we can do. But you've spoken of California as a broken state in some ways and suggested it's a cautionary example of why the Democratic Party is struggling. Can you share what you mean by that and how you think California could instead become a model for remaking the Democratic Party?
Yeah. So I think probably a lot of people on this call lean in a liberal direction. Probably most of the people are Democrats or independents who kind of lean this way. And I don't know, but I think we're probably all, or most of us in California. So I really think we need to be honest with ourselves. Uh, there are some objective indicators of performance and health and vitality, and they don't look good in the state of California. Why are we losing population? Why are people moving from California to Texas and Florida? Why do we have one of the largest homeless populations in the United States? Why do we suffer the humiliation and dysfunction of what is it, a decade after we resolved to build a high-speed rail between San Francisco and LA, something like that? We've got, I'm going to guess, maybe 20 miles of the project built. Why can't we get anything done in California? Um, and I'll say a few things. Number one, I think the answers to many of these questions are in this amazing book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson called Abundance. And there's a whole kind of political theory called the abundance agenda that's now gripping American political discussions and the Democratic Party. See if I can find the subtitle here. Abundance. What's the subtitle? Well, that's just it. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. You can listen to it on online as an audiobook. I thought it was very well done. You can buy it. You can do both. But please read it and don't say, "Oh, well, I listened to the podcast." This is, in my mind, the most important book written from a kind of progressive direction on politics and public policy of the last decade. That's my opinion. Doesn't have to be yours, but read the book and make your judgment. And the essential argument is that we are so mired in regulations and requirements and bureaucracy that we can't get anything done. The costs rise, the timeline rises, and China just soars ahead of us with high-speed rail and, gleaming infrastructure. It's not just California. I worry that we're losing the race globally, technologically and economically, and the demonstration effects of showing that democracy can be more effective than authoritarianism. But where there's less regulation and more of a resolve to build and less of a not in my backyard mentality, housing is being built in Texas. Housing is more affordable. There are many reasons for that, but the ability to expand the supply of housing is one of them. And more jobs are being created and so on. And so, as liberals, we want meticulous regulation to protect every inch and every aspect of the environment, and environmental impact studies that take as long as they need to. We want, and the Biden administration laid on top of the infrastructure spending the massive amount of it, to quote, build back better in the United States, provisions to ensure that, there's going to be minority contracting and diversity and equity built into all these spending programs and preferences for minority, employers and so on and so forth. We have an honor student at our Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law here who just finished a thesis on the Biden administration's spending programs on infrastructure and the CHIPS and Science Act and so on to build chip fabrication plants. And he asked the question, and the result he found was no impact. Spending, these massive outlays of spending had very little impact in shifting the vote to the Democrats in counties where there was the most money spent. And why was that? Well, there were a lot of reasons. The national political context and so on wasn't favorable. We can argue that. But a major reason why is communities had seen very little of the money that was allocated by the time of the November election. So not only did we not do enough fast enough to revive the economy, but, if I can put it this bluntly, we committed political suicide in the process. We're either going to get things built in an expeditious fashion and revive the state of California as a competitive economy and expand the supply of housing to make housing affordable in California again and reduce homelessness, or we're going to continue to slowly decline as a state. It's too melodramatic to say a failing state, but just a lagging state, that is no longer the California dream. I'm old enough to remember, and looks like there might be just a few people on this call who are also old enough to remember the first Edmund G. Brown, governor of California, Pat Brown. How did Pat Brown become, such a transformative two-term governor of California? He built things. He built housing. He built infrastructure. And of course, it was in an era in the United States when the US was building things. And if we don't really build back better in California, we can't address our affordability crisis, our homelessness crisis, our equity crisis, our transportation crisis. Governing is about making choices. And, if you want to privilege every last environmental impact review down to the last level of certainty and every last angle of elevation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, well, that's a choice. But it's going to come at the expense of other values. And so I think this is now the debate we're going to have in the Democratic Party. And it's the debate that I think we're going to have in the state of California. And I'll tell you something else. If the Democrats, we have the top two system in California, so you only get two candidates. If you get a candidate for governor of California from kind of the progressive Democratic side who's just proposing more of the same, and their opponent as the other candidate is not, a MAGA crazy or, some Steve Garvey 2.0, but a kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger type figure who says, I'm not even going to say I'm a Republican, a Democrat. I don't care. I just want to build California again. I think that person can win the governorship. And I'll say something else. I think a reason we're in the mess we're in is that we don't really have a very competitive party system in California. We're a one-party state, in case you haven't noticed. You know, Schwarzenegger won by accident after Gray Davis imploded in that, electricity crisis. And uh, he wasn't he didn't run really as a very conservative Republican. So you get someone running as an outsider, an independent, a business-oriented Democrat, something like that. I think people just want government to work again, to build again, and to get things done in California. And California is not going to exit its trajectory of decline unless that happens.
Okay, well, we're all fired up now about California, and we
Well,
have a lot of commentary in the
not
chat.
in total agreement, but
Oh yeah,
you
not in
know,
total agreement, and a lot of people
that's
pushing
fine.
back on your analysis or your comparison to Texas and whatnot. But we'll leave that for later. Let me switch a little bit over to the courts. And as a former lawyer, this area kind of strikes close to home. In the past, the courts have been a pretty successful check on the executive overreach. Do you think that's changing? Do you think the groups that are challenging him in court have enough support? And what if he chooses to defy the court orders? What if the Supreme Court is complicit through either inaction, like we saw them delay and delay and delay before he even got elected? It resulted in this catastrophe, I think, that we have right now, or in weakness, using words like facilitate and things like that. What does this mean for our democracy? And how can we view the role of the courts right now?
So it's a mixed bag. Um, there have been something like 246 unique lawsuits filed against Trump administration actions as of, I don't know, a week or a few days ago, and they just keep piling up. And that doesn't count the multiple lawsuits on the same issue. And in the lower courts, we're seeing a very large number of temporary restraining orders and then injunctions, including lower courts issuing nationwide injunctions against deportations and against firings and against a lot of the arbitrary and illegal actions that Trump is taking. The Supreme Court has been very uneven in its record so far. On executive power, unfortunately, there is tending to be, in terms of the scope of presidential authority, a 6-3 or 5-4 majority in favor of Trump having a lot of latitude as president of the United States to exercise federal government power. There's a very iconic and important case uh, that has preserved the autonomy of the federal bureaucracy and particularly of federal government agencies for the last 90 years or so since the New Deal. It's called Humphrey's Executor, and that's the name of a lawsuit that prevented FDR from firing uh, federal government commission officers who had a fixed term of office. And the Supreme Court just delivered, and it was expected that it would, I don't know, a week or so ago, a decision that essentially has killed Humphrey's Executor and said it was actually maybe a series of decisions, but one involved a member of the National Labor Relations Board, Gwen Wilcox, I see you nodding your head, Susie, so you know the
I'm a labor
case.
lawyer. I'm an employment lawyer.
Right, who was fired from her fixed term as a member of
Right.
the NLRB, and then she sued, and the Supreme Court, unfortunately, sided with Trump and basically said, yeah, you can fire whoever you want. It doesn't matter if they have a fixed term. I think this was an outrageous and very dangerous decision, uh, enlarging federal government power. But there have been a number of other decisions that have gone against Trump
Mhm.
or where the Supreme Court has signaled an intent to go against Trump, as in birthright citizenship. I think it's almost certain that he's going to lose his bid to overturn birthright citizenship. There's a good chance that the Supreme Court will allow to stand the practice of a lot of federal lower court judges now to issue not just injunctions, but nationwide injunctions preventing the federal government from, deporting a whole class of people or firing a whole class of people or denying student visas for international students in general and not just international students at Harvard. So it's a mixed picture, but there's the arena that has most contained Trump so far and frustrated or slowed his authoritarian ambitions has been the federal courts. And there have been a few decisions, more than a couple, in which there have been 5-4 majorities for, I'd say, the Constitution, the rule of law, and the constraint of government power, in which both Justice Roberts, who was at one time the swing vote on the court, and now the new swing justice on the Supreme Court, quite surprisingly to many of us who were so upset about her appointment, Amy Coney Barrett, has sided with the three Democratic appointed justices and Roberts in decisions to constrain government power. And then in one case, it was 7-2 with only Alito and Clarence Thomas voting to allow Trump to be, you know, king not only for a day, but for a whole presidential term.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you do think they're going to do the right thing, and you think he will have to be forced to follow their rule?
So here's what I think. I think that we're going to have, a kind of spread of decisions, and that in terms of appointment power, Humphrey's executor is dead and he can do what he wants. In terms of
What
the
about due process, and giving these people the right to at least have their cases be heard?
that is a realm in which I think the courts are ruling against Trump, and the Supreme Court will rule against Trump and insist on habeas corpus, due process, and the protection of First Amendment rights to speak. I think that he's going to lose on the Harvard case to a considerable extent, and on a lot of these cases of arbitrary uh, persecution and punishment of institutions and individuals. So then the question becomes, what happens if he openly defies a Supreme Court order? Um, it means we then have not a partial, but a full constitutional crisis. It means that if he isn't constrained by the Congress, the business community, the society, and so on, he then is king indefinitely, not just for a day or a week. Um, I don't think he'll say, I don't respect the Supreme Court anymore. They can't constrain my authority. I'm going to do whatever I want. I think he'll try to defy the Supreme Court incrementally without declaring that that's what he is doing. And then we'll be in a long, iterative shadowboxing contest between Trump and the federal judiciary over the course of his remaining 3.5 years in power. That's my prediction.
Well, it's so frustrating to us. And so that kind of leads to my next question. What do you think is the most effective way to organize against some of these actions? Some people feel that the protests are maybe just performative, these protests at Tesla dealerships and the things that go on. Some people think that we really need to ramp it up. I mean, folks like David Brooks have called for a national civic uprising. What do you think we need to do? What do you see as the lack of coordination or coordination against groups to really do some effective protesting?
So, first of all, I would strongly dispute the argument that the protests against Tesla have not been effective. You know what has been transformative with regard to Elon Musk and Tesla? It's not the protests outside the Tesla dealerships, which I support and encourage, and I think have been effective. It's the gathering consumer boycott of Tesla as a company. Tesla's sales in Europe, I think, are down by something like 60%,
Right.
and they're down by a non-trivial percent in the US as well. And so when we talk about tactics of nonviolent civil resistance, it's not only demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, which I also strongly support. And it's not only labor strikes, and I think there could be a role for that. It's also consumer boycotts and a range of other things. And look, we've got a number of people now business people, who have, uh, thrown in their lot with Trump and are corruptly supporting him. Amazon has a frightening monopoly over high-speed, easy consumer purchases in the US. I could imagine, an act of nonviolent civil resistance where people were mobilized to stop using Amazon for a month, see what happens. Most people can find other means of getting what they want delivered more slowly. Just to give you an example. And other businesses that have thrown in their lot with Trump and are even seeking corrupt benefits. So there are a variety of ways of doing this. Uh, in terms of mass civic resistance, like a mass march on Washington or a mass national strike or defiance, we want to. I think an important lesson in a strategy of resistance is graduation, elevation, escalation of tactics in response to the severity of what's being done. So if you say we now live in a fascist state, and therefore one of two radically different corollaries, therefore it's hopeless, it's already over, which is, I think, one submission we got in this in advance of this meeting. Or we now live in a fascist state. We need mass total resistance and a work stoppage now. I'm sorry, I've studied Nazi Germany. This is not 1935 Germany. We're not living in a fascist state. I think Trump has some fascistic impulses and characteristics, but this is not a fascist regime. We don't have political prisoners now. The level of punishment and control that happens in a full-blown authoritarian regime isn't even close to what we're experiencing now. And so if we declare the most extreme perception of risk and damage to democracy imaginable, how do we then escalate, both in our assessment of the situation and in our tactics, when it gets much worse? So we need some sense of proportion, and we need some sense of a strategy, a ladder of escalation in response to what well could be his escalation in tactics.
Mhm. Well, I know that coming up on June 14th is the protest, the counter programming to his military parade, and that some people have wanted to make sure people participate in the Palo Alto No Kings Act protest. So I don't know if you think that's effective or you think that's just on the
I
road to
think
escalation.
I think protest is effective, and I favor large amounts of it distributed around the country. I don't think it's quite the time yet for a 1 million-person march on Washington, but it may be at some point. With respect to protesting on June 14th, is extraordinary abuse of the process of military engagement in public life. The more veterans we can bring to the rostrum at these protests, including retired military officers, to speak out and say the military should not be misused in this kind of intimidating and authoritarian infused way. The more we can bring, military veterans out to join us in this protest, the better.
Okay. So now we're going to turn it over, I think, to a few people who are going to ask a question live. Michelle?
Yeah, that's right. So we're starting with a question from Mark Bergman, who I think you know well, Larry. So Mark, go ahead and ask your question.
I will, but if I may, just two very quick things. One, June 6th, there are rallies across the country starting in the mall, which are in support of veterans, Unite America,
Okay.
5051. It's all on the internet. So there are opportunities there too. The IEPA tariff ruling just came down against Trump, 3-0 in the International Court. That's as of 20 minutes ago. My question is this, Larry, and we worry about free and fair elections. We have Hungary, the illiberal democracy, as a template that might be out there. As Trump takes down CISA and CIS and a variety of other agencies that, at least in the 24 and going back even to 20, were very much focused on election security. What are your thoughts about how we counter that to ensure that those elections are both free and fair, starting with 2025, maybe a little easier because it's Virginia, New Jersey. But I welcome your thoughts on state responses and the like to ensure that those elections do go forward.
So there was a infrastructure for monitoring of digital threats to the integrity of the information space and of our election and voting systems that was headed by a brilliant computer security specialist, Christopher Krebs.
Yep.
And over the course of the Trump administration, he did too good a job. And then after the 2020 election, he said, "No, Mr. President, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You didn't win the election. This is the most secure and honest election, at least in recent American history, and you lost." And so he was fired. The architecture he helped to build has been dismantled. And Trump has asked the FBI to investigate him to find some rationale for prosecuting him because he wants to make a lesson out of people like that, the way he's made a lesson out of Harvard. So, Mark, I guess one possibility is that a few large states like California could try and pick up some of the effort to monitor this, and not just for California, but more broadly, because, in the end, it's there are national and not just statewide threats. And, all states, they're going to need to ramp up their efforts at vigilance of their voting machines and their digital equipment and so on and so forth. Trump issued an executive order on March 30th to require that all states require photo IDs in order to vote. We know why he did this. It's not because he really wants to stamp out fraud, but he wants to stamp out voting rights for lower income people who don't have government issued voter IDs and are more likely to vote Democratic. And, he's hinting at possibly requiring states to use certain kinds of voting machines, which might be voting machines that just so happen to be applied by Republican donors. A little bit of suspiciousness there. But, the Constitution is pretty clear that states have the authority to govern their elections and make these decisions. And I don't think he will be able to get a bill passed that kind of does the Voting Rights Act in reverse through both houses of Congress. So he's probably not going to be able to achieve his will in this regard. But states really, and maybe a few civil society organizations and coalition will need to step up to fill the void.
Thank you.
Great. Our next question is from Erwin Hossino.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for being here, Professor. Question about our academic institutions with what's happened at Columbia and Harvard and what might happen for other institutions. What can and should our academic institutions be doing right now to protect their academic and intellectual freedom?
Well, most of all, hanging together to defend the principles of academic freedom. And I think other prominent universities should be essentially coming to Harvard's defense and saying that this is not the way, to kind of pick out one elite institution and demonize it and weaponize the awesome power of the federal government against it. To persuade the American people that this is not only a threat to academic freedom, but to freedom in general, to our ability to exercise our First Amendment rights. I don't think universities have been very good in making their case or waging their arguments. So I will add two more things. Number one, I think the argument that will enable us to prevail is not an intrinsic argument, though I very much favor intrinsic arguments about freedom, democracy, constitutionalism, due process, and the rule of law, and I don't think we should abandon them. It's a practical argument. If you want to make America great again, if you want America to lead in innovation, science, technology, and economic growth, dismantling the research enterprise in universities, dismantling most of the funding of the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health is a pretty bad and self-destructive way to do it. And indeed, it's paving the way. This is the subject of my next column on Substack. It's paving the way for China to win the race, to lead the world technologically, economically, and frankly, politically and diplomatically, and certainly economically. So it's just bad in every respect. It's going to lead to a lower quality of life, less efficiency, less dynamic American businesses, fewer jobs, and less progress in combating illness and disease because it's damaging the infrastructure of discovery and innovation in health and pharmaceuticals. I mean, I can't imagine something more destructive. But universities are not making that case very persuasively right now. One who did is the former president of MIT, Raphael Reese, in a recent column or essay in Foreign Affairs that I highly recommend to all of you. And then the second point is that, we talk to ourselves. I sit at an elite university, obviously, where, my colleagues generally feel that, oh, if we declare our principled opposition to what Trump is doing and its violations of civil liberties, the rule of law, academic freedom, institutional autonomy, the American people will rally to our cause. Well, I'm sorry. You look at the polls on public trust in universities, not super high right now. And it's amazing because so many of the people who are doing this are political scientists or sociologists, but they're not reading their own work. We've got to build cross-sectoral coalitions. So if we don't reach out to the business community, to labor unions, to religious groups, and other community organizations and pillars of American society that aren't, in the comfy environment of, an ivory tower, and, make the case together for why the health and, the financial and intellectual vibrancy of universities is critical to the economic and geopolitical and physical health of the United States, we're going to lose. We're going to lose that argument. And so it's beyond principle, solidarity, articulateness, and so on. It's just, can we read our own research and be a little bit more effective in forging a political strategy of pushing back?
Is there any efforts going on right now to collaborate with each other? Are there some universities that are trying to create groups so that you all act together?
There are dialogues going on. I don't know the details, but there are dialogues going on among university presidents, some number of them.
Good.
Certainly, the Professional Association of American University Professors, which is virtually called that, the AAUP, has experienced in the last 3 months an explosion of membership. At Stanford, I think we've gone from 5 members to 200 members in the matter of a few weeks. And that's happening at a lot of college campuses across the US. So professors across, political perspectives and disciplines are joining together and becoming active again. And there's a national association for this. And there is dialogue and interchange among universities and university presidents, but I don't see the necessary vigor and forthrightness of the joint action and voice of university leaders, and I don't see the political strategy to build bridges to other sectors of American society that I think are needed. Not yet.
Okay. I think we're almost at the end. So Michelle?
Yeah, so I know, I can't believe we're already at almost 5 o'clock. So our last question was for you was, what gives you hope right now? Are we seeing the emergence of leaders or ideas that meet the scale of the moment? And if you could leave this group with 1 or 2 priorities to focus on, what would they be?
So what gives me hope is that we're seeing a lot of pushback. We are seeing a fair amount of it from the federal courts. We're starting to see a few members of Congress Republicans beginning to question this. I would watch John Curtis of Utah. I think that he's an interesting and conscientious new senator succeeding Mitt Romney. I would watch the behavior and voice of the Mormon church more generally in Utah. I think it might be a bit of a weather vane coming from outside the kind of, predictable progressive realm. I think the business community is pretty worried about what his tariffs will do to the economy. He's been forced to retreat in some significant respects, including on tariffs, but we'll see what happens. They're being tied up in lawsuits and, national injunctions against a lot of their arbitrary actions. And, you can't, the advantage always lies with the authoritarian mover, right? They know what they want to do. They have the executive power. They take the initiative. And, it's just the nature of the game that the people who are on the receiving end then need to figure out how to respond. So it takes time. But I do see the beginnings of more voices, more action, more coordination, both in civil society and in and potentially in Congress on what priorities people should have. I would say, well, if you're inclined to have a political one, that would certainly help. Um, I've mentioned what is the overwhelming priority for me, and I think it's really vital that those three justices in Pennsylvania have their terms renewed in November of this year. And it's the potential for potentially very consequential impact with a modest investment of funding. What would the funding vehicle be? It'll come, you'll find out about it, but you can Google what might already exist in the state of Pennsylvania. And postcards, phone calls, they all matter. Anybody who's got family in Pennsylvania and could spend the last few days of the election campaign, walking doors and encouraging people to vote, I actually think it's that important. But, there'll be a lot of congressional races that we in California could make a difference in. I thought Will Rollins running in Palm Springs, Riverside, I thought he really was a strong candidate with a great chance of winning. He lost again in the red tide, right? But that's a district I think that can be won. On the other hand, the Republicans have been salivating for 2 or 3 terms now to try and capture Josh Harder's seat in Stockton area. He needs to be defended. There are 2 or 3 seats we could easily pick up in the state of California. And so I would pay attention to those and other swing districts. And then there are a lot of good organizations, Protect Democracy, Democracy Forward, Public Citizen, the Brennan Center for Justice, Democracy 2025, Renewed Democracy Initiative. There's a organization prioritizing the needs of women and mothers, but of grassroots constituencies more generally, Moms Rising, that's got a lot of opportunities for involvement. So I think keeping an eye on those and, offering them some financial support and maybe volunteer help, there are going to be a lot of opportunities to be engaged.
Great.
So I'm just looking in the chat and people are asking about the chat itself and the organizations that you just listed, Larry. So we'll be sending a follow-up email with all the information from the chat, all the links to click on to follow up, and all the conversation that went on in the chat. We'll be
Great.
sending that in a follow-up. Yeah.
If you could send them my March 24th Substack essay, Defending Democracy in America, it lists all the organizations with hypertext links in toward the end of the article, and it also has a list of things that people can do.
Excellent. I just shared
We will
that.
put that. Did you share that? Okay, thanks, Michelle.
Follow up with that as well.
Okay, so I think that we are at the end or over the end of our time. So thank you everyone for saying. Thank you, Larry, so much for such an enlightening conversation. It was depressing at times, but it gave us things to do and ideas of where we can focus our energy. We all can play a part, and there's lots of things that we can do to going forward. We're going to continue this series of salon lectures going forward. This was just our first one. We're going to explore the new media landscape in the future. We're going to explore some of these legal challenges that are going on and how people are fighting legally to push back against authoritarianism. Our full series of what we're planning on doing in the salon series is called Counter Strike, a Blueprint for Action. And we will send you that link, and we'll drop it in the chat as well. And so thank you all very, very much for coming.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Larry. And one last thing, we have our next session lined up. It's called Litigating Autocracy Inside the Legal Resistance to Trump's Second Term. It'll be featuring Ryan Goodman, who's the co-founder of Just Security, and it will be on Wednesday, June 25th at 4 p.m. So we'll be sure to send all of that in our follow-up email, and hope to see everyone at that next session in late June.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Larry.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry.
Thank
Thank you.
everyone for coming.